It's Father's Day, so we're mixing up our favorite cocktail, the father of them all, the old fashioned. We're making 4 versions, starting from the very beginning to the Stave and Slide version. So stick with us.
Right here at the bar with Stave and Slide.
Welcome back to At the Bar with Stave and Slide. Dan, Corey, and we are here today for another great episode. So it's Father's Day,
That's right.
and we're going to make our favorite cocktail,
The father of them all.
the father of them all, because we're the fathers,
We are.
and we're gonna make our favorite cocktail, the father of all cocktails. Which one is it?
The old fashioned.
The old fashioned. The old fashioned
go
go
all
all the way back to the first definition of the word cocktail. You find that in 1806 in an upstate New York newspaper called the Balance and Columbian Repository. So a writer wrote in to the newspaper basically asking, what is this word cocktail that I've been hearing about? Because up until that point, the primary, drink that people have been drinking were punches, mulled wines, crustas, juleps, things like that. Cocktail wasn't really a big thing.
It was a slang term.
Right, and it had just started kind of taking off. So a reader wrote in to this newspaper and said, "Hey, what is this cocktail word that I heard of?" And what was that definition?
It's a stimulating liquor composed of spirits of any kind, sugar, water, and bitters.
That sounds an awful like an old-fashioned to me.
Pretty much.
Which is interesting because that's the definition of a cocktail, which sounds exactly like an old-fashioned, but we know cocktails have a lot of other components, right?
Yeah,
So
the cocktail that people, the term cocktail used today encompasses all kinds of, beyond sugar, water, and bitters.
Right.
To fruits, juices, and all kinds of.
think about a martini. A martini is a classic cocktail. It doesn't have sugar. It doesn't have bitters. Think about a Manhattan. It's got vermouth in it. It doesn't have sugar in it. So cocktails do not follow that formula. But in 1806, that's how it was defined. And that's what an old fashioned is. That's exactly what it is.
And it was a way to start your day.
You had it in the morning.
It was the morning.
You kicked it off. So that's how the cocktail was defined in 1806, and that's how it was kicked off. So that's really where we start our journey when we're talking about the old fashioned and what it is and where it comes from. So what we're gonna do today is we're gonna make the old fashioned. We're gonna make it throughout history. We're gonna make 4 different versions of it. We're gonna start from the beginning, and we're gonna kind of work our way throughout history. The first version that we're gonna make comes from 1862,
Right.
from the first printed cocktail book ever made, and that's Jerry Thomas's Bartender's Guide, or the Bon Vivant's Companion.
Which you have a reprint
I have
version
right here.
there.
I've got this is a reprinted version, because the original first editions run for thousands of dollars. So I have a reprinted version. This is an 1887 reprint copy. But Jerry Thomas, he was a bartender in the 1800s, and he wrote the first cocktail book. And so the first drink that we're going to make here is called the whiskey cocktail.
Yep.
And that's really what we're going to say is like the father of the old fashioned. And on our Father's Day, we're going to make the father of the old fashioned.
So the whiskey cocktail is kind of the blank canvas of everything that comes after it. And really the old fashioned is kind of even the modern old fashioned today, I think, is really a blank canvas, because you can add whatever type of flavor notes to it that you want, and it's still an old fashioned. I think there's a point you cross when you add certain, if you add fruit juice or certain other things, it's obviously not an old fashioned anymore.
Yeah.
But as long as you stick to the basic sugar, water, liquor, and bitters.
Sugar, water, spirits, bitters. You can definitely take it off course, and we're going to talk about that here in just a second, because that's exactly what happened, and it's still happening now. But the definition that we had in 1806 for a cocktail, which is what we know the old fashioned to be, it's a formula.
Right.
it doesn't have to be this exact thing or that exact thing. It's a formula, and you can riff on it. And that's what happened. That's what happened after Jerry Thomas printed his first recipe for the whiskey cocktail. And in this 1887 reprint that I have, there's another recipe that he has for his whiskey cocktail, and he lists it as the improved whiskey cocktail. Right. So, what do you think? What do you think we mean when we talk about improved whiskey cocktail?
So I think like what I was saying is how you can introduce other flavor elements, other liqueurs, other bitters, flavored bitters, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I think some of the early additions to make the improved whiskey cocktail would have been curacao, chartreuse, absinthe.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. So a lot of these liqueurs and things, they were coming over from Europe.
Right.
And so bartenders, just like we do, they're curious. They start experimenting with things, and they start adding a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and start kind of tinkering with that original formula, that original recipe. And that's where we get the improved whiskey cocktail, which is a variation of that original formula. But this migration from this improved whiskey cocktail to trying to get back to what it originally was is where we get the old fashioned from. That's where we get the name from, because it started out originally being the whiskey cocktail as Jerry Thomas defined it, wrote it in his recipe book. And when folks wanted to go back to that, they started ordering at the bar, I want an old-fashioned whiskey cocktail. Basically, I want the original. Eventually, the whiskey cocktail just kind of got dropped from the name, and it just became known as the old-fashioned.
Yeah, and everything, just like the word cocktail itself, it starts off in one form and it just morphs into, cocktail went from a slang term for that morning beverage to, as they would say, cock your tail.
Yep.
And get you going in the morning. To it's faster just to say, give me a cocktail. And same thing with the old fashioned. It was just evolved over time.
Now, moving along after that, we get into kind of the Prohibition and post-Prohibition days, and that didn't do the old fashioned any favors, in our opinion, and I think in most folks' opinion either. The old fashioned saw a resurgence during that time in popularity. It really did. Cocktails did as well. Well, first during Prohibition, of course, we know what happened, right? So you had obviously, alcohol being outlawed for sale. So you had a lot of bartenders that ended up leaving the States.
Right.
A lot of the skilled bartenders that ended up, applying their trade elsewhere because, it wasn't beneficial to stay here in the U.S. and continue doing that. So they took a lot of that knowledge with them. So a lot of that methodology, a lot of that experience went away, and you had cheap bootleg liquor, you had bathtub gin, you had all that kind of stuff happening, right? And so to mask those flavors, you had a lot of sugar added, you had a lot of muddled fruit added, you had a lot of that stuff going on, right?
And all being mixed together by folks that didn't necessarily have the requisite skill to make a good cocktail, even out of bad liquor.
Yeah, they didn't have that pedigree.
They overdid it.
So the old fashioned kind of took a hit. So that from that whiskey cocktail to that improved whiskey cocktail, going back to the basics. Now Prohibition hits, and that post-Prohibition time, getting into the mid-century modern time now, it still is resembling that Prohibition time of that muddled fruit, of a lot of that sugar, a lot of that soda water, really stuck around.
It did, and partly because to a point, the bourbon that was going in it maybe wasn't what we know as good bourbon today.
Still. It wasn't. Bourbon wasn't being aged for 6, 7, 8, 9 years like it is now.
Right.
Single barrel, small batch, that wasn't a thing.
No, and so that fruit just kind of hung around for a better part of a decade and a half or so. I would say.
But the old fashioned rose in popularity. Drinking culture skyrocketed. Of course, you started having your cocktail hour. You had the folks on Madison Avenue, right? That were all your advertising executives.
The office cocktail party.
Yeah, you had all that. So we get into the Mad Men age, right?
Right.
So I got my little Don Draper guy here. For those folks that are familiar with the AMC series Mad Men, that was Don Draper's drink of choice. And we're going to make the Don Draper Old Fashioned. Don't necessarily recommend drinking it because it's not the best version of it, but we're going to make it because that is a journey through cocktail history of the Old Fashioned. And it's very important to talk about it because it's a significant part of the Old Fashioned's history because it occupied a significant chunk of time because it wasn't until the last 15, 20 years that was the Old Fashioned that you were going to get if you were going to order one.
Right. And after that kind of mid-century, probably mid-70s, when clear liquor kind of took over the scene,
the disco drinks,
everybody was flocking to gins and vodka was big, vodka drinks.
All the teeny phase.
Nobody was working to improve the Old Fashioned from that muddled mess in the Don Draper version until
some rogue bartenders.
Yeah, I would say the early to mid 90s.
Yeah, mid 90s to the early 2000s. You had some brave souls that took the mantle up, this cause for all of us, and we're better off for it.
Absolutely.
So first off, for the whiskey cocktail, we're going to start off with some ice in a mixing glass. Now, the cool thing about this whiskey cocktail here is this is an old recipe, and there's some ingredients in here that you may not be familiar with. You can get them now because there are some companies that are making some things. If you don't have all of that, you can substitute. We're going to use gum syrup because this is what Jerry Thomas called for. Gum syrup is made from gum arabic and cane sugar. If you don't have it, you can use simple syrup. His recipe originally calls for like 3 or 4 dashes of it. We're going to use about 1/4 of an ounce of the gum syrup.
Yeah, and to kind of go along with some ingredients you may not have heard of or that's hard to find, you may hear some measurements that aren't really measurements. But
we'll talk about it. They're a little different. We're also going to use Fee Brothers Cardamom bitters, which are Boker style. So Boker's bitters were a very popular bitters back in Jerry Thomas's time. That company went defunct in Prohibition time, but there are a few companies now that are recreating Boker's bitters. Fee Brothers are one, Bitter Truth is one. There's a couple others, so you can find these. If you can't get your hands on Boker style bitters, you can use Angostura as a substitute. This is going to be a couple dashes of Boker's bitters. And then we're going to use 2 ounces of our whiskey. We're using rye because that would have been most prevalent during Jerry Thomas's time. Okay. So the 2 ounces of rye that we use, Jerry Thomas actually calls for a wine glass.
Right. Yeah, that's one of those measurements that it's not really a measurement. So, 1 wine glass of whiskey.
Yeah.
Which could be, who knows?
But roughly 2 ounces is what has been determined that's what that equates to. Then we're going to strain that. Now, Jerry Thomas also calls for straining this into a fancy red wine glass, which would have been a short squatted glass. I don't really necessarily probably have the exact glass that he would have used, so this is what we're going with. That's about the closest equivalent that we have today. And another interesting thing about the whiskey cocktail is that you don't serve it over ice.
Right.
So, and then we're going to garnish this one just with a lemon peel. And that is the whiskey cocktail.
It is.
Go ahead and give that a shot.
It's delicious. The lemon with the rye. It's just it's a classic combination. And
the original whiskey old fashioned as prescribed by Jerry Thomas in the first ever cocktail recipe ever printed. Now,
He knew what he was doing.
exactly. Now, for myself, whenever I'm making an old fashioned, if I put rye, I always garnish with lemon. If I do bourbon, I do an orange. That's how the spiciness of the rye complements with the lemon so well, and then the sweetness of the bourbon and the orange. So then, moving on from that, as we talked about in history, you had the whiskey cocktail, and then you had this period of time that we had the improved whiskey cocktail, right? Adding the curacao, the maraschino, the absinthe, which some of those can be fantastic, because what happens if you take the whiskey cocktail and you add a little bit of absinthe? What do you basically get?
Well, you put me on the spot, and now it went right out of my head.
You get a Sazerac.
Sazerac, thank
Yeah, which we know is delicious.
you. We made one.
We made one, but it's not. It's different from an old fashioned,
Yeah.
right? And I know people that love old fashions that wouldn't necessarily like a Sazerac. Right. So if you like this drink and you like an old fashioned, that's what you want, and you aren't necessarily wanting those anise flavors that you're going to get from the absinthe, and somebody's putting that in your drink, and you're like, oh, I don't want that. That's off-putting. Hey, you're gonna give me that other drink. Give me that. I don't want that whatever's in that green bottle back there,
Yeah, I don't
or
want
that yellow chartreuse or whatever that is. Get that crap out of my old fashioned,
Just give me what I know.
or get that crap out of my whiskey cocktail.
Right. Exactly. It wasn't an old fashioned.
It wasn't old fashioned because I want an old fashioned whiskey cocktail.
Right.
The way that I'm used to it being made, which gets us to the old fashioned whiskey cocktail. We're going to make this one with bar sugar. We're going to put about a teaspoon in there. And then I'm going to put a few dashes of Angostura. Thank you. And then we'll include a little bit of water to help mix that up.
Now, some people use seltzer water.
Yeah.
Or
now, back at this time here, we really would have just probably put a little bit of water, because we're going back to the original recipe here.
Right.
This is what we're trying to do. We're trying to get back to the basics of this drink here. We're trying to get back to what was originally prescribed in 1806. Okay, go ahead. You got it. Okay, and this one we're going to use bourbon, and I'm going to use a high-proof bourbon. We're going with Old Grandad 114. For this cocktail, we're going to do 2 ounces of our bourbon.
So something I remember reading, I think in the old-fashioned book that we have over there, is at this point in history, with the use of bar sugar and later a sugar cube, and if anybody's had an old-fashioned that uses bar sugar or a sugar cube, you'll know. There's always a little undissolved heap of sugar in the bottom. So back in the day, they were serving it, there it is, with a bar spoon.
Here.
Some kind of small spoon, which inevitably
You can mix it around.
would end up in somebody's pocket.
It would. You can have it with that spoon. Serve it like that. There you go.
Oh, me again?
Yeah.
Oh, thanks, sir. Appreciate that. Try not to put my eye out with the spoon, which was also in an article in the book.
It was.
Same thing, and like you said, the orange
The orange and the bourbon
and the bourbon is the
go
right
together
one.
so well.
I think it would not work as well with a lemon
No,
or anything else.
we're gonna do what we don't recommend doing.
Please.
Okay, but we're taking one for the team. Okay, we're doing this for you. All right, because we owe it to you to show you what what this old fashioned is, and what not to do, basically.
Right.
Just don't do this at home.
History repeats itself, but we hope that this one won't.
Yeah. Please don't try this at home. That's all I can say.
Right.
We're making the Don Draper. Now, when he makes it, what he does, it's sugar cube, and he grabs the Demerara sugar cube, Angostura, douses it, a few dashes, grabs a maraschino cherry,
Not the good kind.
nope, not the good kind. This is the radioactive kind. Plop it in. And that gets muddled.
I already don't like it.
Right?
You can taste this one.
Take your mixing glass. Now, when Don Draper hops behind the bar at this private club having this Kentucky Derby party, there's no bartender, there's no bourbon. He grabs rye, he grabs Old Overholt.
Classic.
Don Draper doesn't measure. Don Draper just pours.
That looks about right.
I think so. We'll call that good. He also adds almost as much as club soda. He then proceeds to do that a healthy mix. And then the whole thing goes in the glass.
I mean, you can see the color difference even.
Take your orange wedge, garnish.
No,
You're the taste tester.
No, sir.
You're
Go.
comparing all of these.
all right. That's terrible.
That's the Don Draper. Now, it is also worth mentioning that the majority of the old fashions that were going to be made during this time were also probably muddling the orange as well. But he didn't do it in the show, so I didn't muddle the orange. Made it just the way that he did it.
Should be noted that that wouldn't help.
Probably not. But that's the old fashioned that. And if you were going to go get, if you're going to a bar in like the 80s or the early 90s, 70s, and you were ordering an old fashioned, that's what you would get.
Sure.
Yeah. So now we're going to make the Stave and Slide old fashioned. Again, this is nothing special, nothing spectacular. This is just the way that we like to make it. This is after, like I said, after years of making old fashions for myself. I like to experiment a lot, and this is what we've landed on.
Yeah.
So, all right. I'm going to start with this is the Rich Demerara simple syrup,
Yep.
right? So that's going to be 1/4 of an ounce.
Oh, you get the good.
I do.
Mhm.
Oh, of
gotta
course I
taste-
get that.
I gotta taste this.
Yep. Well, you're getting this drink. You're getting this. Almost messed up. Almost messed up. Now, we're doing the mixing glass. A lot of times I build it in the glass, mixing glass, either one. We're gonna do in the mixing glass for you guys. All right. I like to do 2 kinds of bitters, so we're going to do a couple of dashes of Angostura, and then 2 dashes of Reagan's orange bitters as well.
And there's that orange element again.
I like it. It's just so good. And then we are going to use, I am a heavy-handed pour on my bourbon
Yes, you are.
for my old fashioned. Especially with the Demerara simple syrup. I think the proportion goes well.
It balances.
The complexity is great. 2.5 ounces of our Buffalo Trace. I like to get all that syrup at the bottom. Boom. Okay. Get some ice.
get your ice cube, actually.
Yes, please. Another large ice rock. Stir for about 30 seconds for proper dilution. And again, we will garnish this with our orange peel.
Again, I don't know if it's really coming through on the camera, but the color difference, mostly with this one, it should be obvious. If your old fashioned comes to you and looking like that, send it back. Unless you like that kind of thing, but
Yeah, you know.
we hope you don't.
All right, there you go, sir.
Me again?
It's you again.
All right. That's perfect. Everything's balanced. The sweetness, the orange, the bourbon. Some folks might think that's a little heavy, like you said, but I think, again, with the rich Demerara, it's that sugar, that syrup is a little stronger than just a normal simple.
Right. If the bourbon is a little heavy for you, I mean, of course you can go back to 2 ounces. But this, again, this is our version. This is what we like. This is what if I'm making myself an old fashioned and I'm making it the way I want to make it, my favorite old fashioned, that's what I'm making. That's the Stave and Slide old fashioned. And this gets us to, this is the modern craft Renaissance old fashioned. This is what came about after the evolution of it, getting back to the basics of what it was supposed to be back in the beginning. Back to the quality ingredients, just the simplicity of it, because the old fashioned is a simple drink. It's not supposed to have all this extra stuff in it, all these little bits of fruit floating around in there and all that. It's not what it's supposed to be.
Yeah, this is just, the initial recipe is sugar, water, spirit, and bitters. Exactly. That's all this is. We're using a syrup, which is just sugar and water. So we just combined. That's just one step instead of.
Yep.
With the sugar cube.
We do that for consistency. Now, I love using a sugar cube. I mean, I like it for the methodology of it. I like it for the history of it. I like it for just the ritualisticness of it. But it's not as consistent. It leaves back the little bit of the sugar particles in the bottom, which some people like. It gets a little sweeter. Yeah. It gets a little sweeter over time. The drink changes. But for a consistent old fashioned, that's going to be the same every time. Simple syrup, Demerara syrup. You can't go wrong with it. That's my preference, and this makes a fantastic cocktail. And
I think for me, if I had to pick, obviously the Stave and Slide old fashioned, but my second would be the original whiskey
go ahead
cocktail.
And give this one a shot. Yeah.
Not that there's anything wrong with this version.
Fantastic.
At all. This one.
That one's not. Yeah, we're not drinking that one.
Can put that away.
And so this is the old fashioned, our favorite cocktail, our Father's Day cocktail. We started from the beginning. We made our way to our Stave and Slide version throughout history. We hope that you enjoyed it, this journey with us. We maybe hope that you learned a little something about the old fashioned, and we appreciate you spending your time with us. Hope you have a happy Father's Day. Hope you maybe make a old fashioned for yourself at home. And see, I'm gonna take this one here. I'm gonna take the original.
Okay.
You go ahead and take Stave and Slide version. Cheers.
Cheers.
Happy Father's Day. Cheers from Stave and Slide.